Hey, Nate here. Pete and I uh, decided to take a different route on the podcast and spend some time interviewing pastors from around the country, perhaps even around the globe. Um, this podcast is with Pastor Garry Fisher. The next one will be with Pastor Trevor down in Florida. So I just hope you enjoy these podcasts. Commit with me to pray for pastors as they lead us and guide us in our spiritual endeavors, and I just hope you enjoy the podcast.
All right, so Nate and Pete back, and Pete, why don't you just take a minute and just introduce our guest and what we're doing here, and go ahead.
So what we wanted to do with Theology Improv is, I know over the last episodes that we've done, we've really just talked theology, talked doctrine, and Nate and I wanted to kind of shift gears for a little bit. We don't know how long we're going to do this, but really to invite other pastors, to invite pastors to the conversation, to give us kind of an insight, to give us some view of what it is to do ministry in the 21st century in America. And so our guest today is my father-in-law, Garry Fisher. He is the pastor of Community Congregational Church in Michigan, and he's been in the ministry for a long time. I mean, and he's done a lot in the Lord's work. So it is really our honor, it's our privilege to have him with us today. We're going to have to keep this really as short as possible because it is a busy day for him. But we do appreciate that he would come on board. And then as we continue to do this, maybe for the next, I don't know, we'll see how it plays out. A couple weeks, maybe a couple months, to have other pastors on and continue to really get a sense of what it is that pastors do, the things that the way they see the world, the way they see ministry, being on that side of the bridge. You know, those of us who have started ministry, we're on this side. We're looking to those who've already kind of traversed so many things and faced so many obstacles and had, Lord willing, many victories. And so this morning it was just kind of Nate and I are going to do our best to try to interview Pastor Fisher and just see how it turns out. So
okay, I'll throw in a quick correction before you get too far down the road. The church I'm the pastor of is actually right across the state line in Indiana. And I live in Michigan. So okay. I'm only just 5 miles from the church, but because it's a border ministry, so to speak, I'm really pretty close. Actually, in the summertime, I'll ride my bike to church even. So it's quite close. But the church, if people looked it up, it would be in Indiana, South Bend, Indiana.
Yeah, and you can probably only do that like 1 or 2 months out of the year.
That's about it.
Right. That's got to be cool, though, ride your bike to church.
Yeah.
Well, I only do it on days, and I hope I don't have to make any calls, or I don't have a nursing home service, or any of the other things that I have to do during the week. So right. My backup is to call home and ask somebody to come and deliver a car for me so I can go do something.
Nice. Awesome. All right. Well, Nate, did you have any questions? I had some questions I had loaded, but
yeah, go ahead and ask away, and I'll just put mine in as it makes sense.
All right. So, just for our viewers, Pastor, I was hoping that you could kind of give us a brief synopsis of your call to ministry, where you've ministered, just so we have some sense, some kind of background of where you've been and where you are now.
All right. I grew up in a intact Christian family. My parents came to follow Christ during World War II. And so when we 3 boys came along, myself, my older brother, and my younger brother, we were brought up in a home that regularly attended church, read the Bible and prayed, not only there, but also at home. And honestly, there never was a time in my life when I didn't want to be in the ministry. I have a little document somewhere in my boxes of memories that I got in the 3rd grade. And it's what will I be from A to Z? And you had to go through it as a 3rd grader and fill in the blanks. And there in my little schoolboy script, I wrote that I wanted to be a pastor. So there was no Damascus Road experience as the Apostle Paul had when he had a vision of Jesus. There was no call in the night like the Macedonian call that Paul experienced. There was no voice that called my name as Samuel did. It was just a growing impression that I always knew that's what I wanted to do. Places I've ministered, I have been a pastor of several churches, mostly in the country. This is really the first city church, and maybe I would characterize it more as suburban, but it's the closest I've been to a city. Most of the churches have been out in the country, rural Michigan and Minnesota. So that's a little of my ministry background. I'm a general practitioner. I never really got the exalted title of senior pastor. I am a senior now, but not in that sense. They've all been solo pastorates. So.
All right. So no softballs. We're going to start probably with maybe the heaviest question, which is, in your experience, what is the hardest thing about doing ministry? And I know that your ministry is it's been across multiple decades. So of course that's fluid and it changes. But in your experiences, you had time to look back. If you had to answer the question, what would you say is kind of the greatest challenge, the hardest thing about being a pastor?
Well, there's no doubt that it's working with people. I work with the Lord fairly well. working with people is, of course, more of a challenge.
Okay.
And I'm scholarly by nature, so I love my time in the study. And over the years, I have collected a great many books, and I love to do exegetical and hermeneutical applications. That part of it doesn't bother me at all. But working with people and not knowing from one minute to the next what need is going to be presented to you, and people at the time when they're most needy, it is both rewarding and also somewhat frustrating. You want to meet their needs, but sometimes you're not able to. So working with people is a challenge.
So on that front, by meeting their needs, is this a spiritual application? Is it a physical application? Is it both? Is it hard to kind of maybe break through their shell and be able to actually get to the real problem for them, or is just the problem itself just fundamentally difficult?
Well, it probably differs from pastor to pastor. I'm a relatively personable person. I can speak in a lot of different occasions, but I also have an enormous possibility of sticking my foot in my mouth at any one time. So I'll try to avoid it here. But on the other hand, meeting with people at a point of need, you want to say the right thing. And when their emotions are raw and things are going very badly for them, that's a time when you want to be especially sensitive. And I'm not always quick to pick up cues there. Someone else might be much better, much more effective at that, but that's been a challenge for me.
So what do you do to kind of, what is your practical practice as a pastor? What do you do to I don't know, check yourself? Like if someone was in the same shoes, what would you advise that they do? If they have a hard time picking up on the cues, what are your practices to make that happen?
Well, I think it's maybe an occupational liability for pastors in general. We always feel like we have to say something. And really, if we could learn to listen more than we speak, I think that would make really a big difference. Yeah. Just listen to people and be able to scope out where they're coming from or what the underlying issues are. Yeah. Asking questions rather than giving answers.
Right. Awesome. That's awesome.
So, Pastor, what would be some, not necessarily examples, but just things that you would like to have back? You think through your career as a pastor, maybe some things you wish you have done differently, or maybe some things you wish you would have pursued or not pursued, or some do-overs maybe. Is there anything that comes to your mind just as someone who's seasoned, been there, done that, been around, and you're looking back maybe at guys that are starting their ministry or maybe midway in or whatever, and you're like, Just giving some, these are some things I wish I could do over again. Anything like that that comes to mind? Or
conflict resolution is a big thing. Dealing with people who are not happy either with each other or with you as a minister or with the church. And at that time, sometimes it's really difficult. But yes, if I had some do-overs, I would go back and try to work differently at resolving some of the conflicts that I faced over the years. People aren't happy with the pastor, have something to say that is harsh or demeaning, and to be able to take it with grace and to turn it around and make a positive opportunity out of it, those things would be really helpful.
Yeah, that sounds that's tough. Taking, especially personal hits, that's really hard to manage sometimes. Big question I had was, you said that you and the Lord get along well. What role, and even practically speaking, what role does your personal time with the Lord, your time of devotions, your time in walking with Him just one-on-one, what role does that play in your life? And then practically speaking, what is your devotion life like? Time spent in prayer, time spent in the Word, really on, let's just, any given day.
Sure. Well, I don't want to start the day without spending time with the Lord. On days that I do that because of scheduling or just because I've been lazy and didn't get up in time and I had things I needed to do. But if I walk out of the house without spending time with the Lord and without reading the scriptures, and this is, of course, reading the scriptures not related to sermon preparation. I make a difference in my own life there. I have heard of pastors who, they said it's the Word no matter when you're studying it. But when I'm doing sermon preparation and when I'm just reading the Bible as a devotional exercise, for me, that's a different kind of experience. And I sit down with the Word, or I might even be walking and listening to the Word now that I can get it on a device that I can carry with me. But I want to spend time with the Lord before my day starts. It is the start of my day. And on days when I don't do that, my days don't seem to go well. I don't want to be legalistic about it. I know the Lord is with me at all times. But in the morning is when I really need to be calling out to the Lord for whatever the day is going to bring me.
So are you do you read through the Bible in the year? Or are you a chapter at a time? Is it just whatever the Lord lays on your heart? Well, I've done different things. Right now I'm doing a daily lectionary. So I have a Psalm reading, an Old Testament reading, a epistle reading, and a gospel reading. And that way I'm reading a little bit of the life of Christ every day. I think it's really impingent on me. I would recommend this for others too, to expose ourselves to the life of Christ every day. And if I'm just reading a chapter a day or 5 a day or 3 a day and 5 on Sunday or some other program, I used McShane's Bible reading plan a couple of years ago, got me through the whole Bible, the Old Testament entirely, and I think the book of Psalms and the New Testament twice. That's a pretty heavy reading schedule, but I hadn't done it for a while, so I wanted to do the whole Bible. With my lectionary reading right now, my daily lectionary, I'm getting through the Bible about every 2 or 3 years.
Wow.
And but I get a sampling of different genres that the Bible contains, and that's helpful for me. But especially if we're going to follow Jesus, we have to know Jesus, and the only way we know Him is through reading the Gospels. So reading the Gospels has been really important for me.
That's real good. So how do you balance family and ministry, and what are some and maybe some advice that you would give for family ministry balance? If that makes sense.
Yes, that's a little awkward for me because of my family situation, but definitely, make time for the family. One of my professors in college said after a long day in the study, and people coming into the church office to see you. Before you go home, go kneel before the altar and leave it there. Don't take it home with you. That was good advice. I went to another conference one time when a pastor said, there's nothing that needs to be done in the ministry that can't be done in a 40-hour work week. Obviously, there are weeks that are not going to do that, but I also read somewhere where the ministry is an amazing opportunity for a lazy man to sit around and do nothing.
Right.
So we need to make wise use of our time, and I need to do that as well. It's easy just to fritter away the time and then think, well, I spent the whole day serving the Lord, when really everything I did I could have encapsulated in a lot shorter period of time. So that's kind of works into it as well. No, you have to make time for the family. And of course, my family situation, since I'm a widower with a large number of children, I've had to be home for them. I cook, I clean, I've done laundry, I do all of that work. And fortunately, as the kids have gotten older, and also with one of my older children who lives with me, that's made it a lot easier in getting some of those tasks accomplished.
Wow.
What would you say is the number one challenge that's facing the church today? Like, if there was something that's on the top of the hill, something that pastors would be, if you're coming out of college or coming out of seminary and you're about to take on a church, and as you go forward specifically in America, what would you say is that number one challenge that faces the church?
Well, in the almost 40 years since I was ordained, there's been a real shift in our culture from having the Judeo-Christian consensus that undergirded us to becoming an increasingly secular society. And that's the milieu in which we find ourselves ministering now. And we have to look way to the past in the book of Acts when the church was in the minority, as it has not been in our country, the United States, for a long time. We have brothers and sisters who have been in other countries where they never experienced that, and so we could also learn from them as well. So this culture shift from having a Christian base, even though we're not saying that the whole culture was Christian, there was a base. The base has eroded so much; it's made a big difference. We need to have a cogent sense of our worldview. We need to really understand what really is our worldview, and not just go into it with a lot of assumptions. People don't necessarily understand what we're talking about anymore.
Yeah, I was listening to someone recounting after they had been to China and speaking with the underground church there in China, and they had said that when the American told the underground church that, oh yeah, in our country we pray for you guys all the time, for the our brothers and sisters that are kind of under that that regime, and they hadn't even the slightest concept that there was a church outside that was even aware of them. They thought they were suffering alone because they were such the minority, so hiding all the time. So yeah, absolutely. What would you say is the way we approach that? I mean, some would say, oh, we have to try to reinstate the Judeo-Christian ethic. We got to change society. Some would say, there's nothing we could do. We just need to kind of roll with the punches. I mean, where do you find the advice there as far as how a pastor's going to kind of navigate those waters?
He needs to be a student of the world in which he lives. He needs to study other worldviews. I think in the past we've majored on the minors. We've seen a great many churches split over really theological hairs that maybe we should have just overlooked and realized, there's room for a difference of opinion there, and stood together shoulder to shoulder better than we have. We tend to isolate ourselves, and that's not a good thing.
That's been my experience calling churches. Just looking for meetings is very cliquish, very, well, you're not of our stripe, or you don't think exactly like we think. I mean, there's guys I've known since I was a kid, and they won't even call me back.
Right.
Because they know kind of some of the things that I was raised in and believe. So anyway, yeah.
And you mentioned just our culture. What, in this culture that we have now, which is different and it changes, or at least from the past, and it seems to be changing so rapidly, what would you say pure pastoring looks like? 'Cause I think that pastors get caught up in this race of, being like others, or having some ministry that looks a certain way or acts a certain way, or their stage looks a certain way. They get wrapped up in the protocol of the service, and they're trying to become something visually versus just keeping a purity of pastoring, what that should look like. What would you say that pure pastoring would look like at its core?
Well, to go back to the root word, we're shepherds. That's what we are. We are shepherds. And Jesus had compassion on the multitudes. He saw them wandering around as sheep without a shepherd. And so we need to have that compassionate view that our good shepherd has, have compassion for people, care about people. And if the thing that they're going through seems minor or irrelevant to you, it may be a mountain they have to climb. So have compassion on them. I think compassionate care for other people is a big part of the ministry of being the shepherd.
Very good.
Go ahead.
It's somewhat of a cliche, of course, but people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Right.
People like to be cared for, and that's the role of a pastor, is providing care. Now that means sometimes they have to be warned, they have to be led, and there are things there too. But the shepherd is not driving the sheep forward. The shepherd has to show the way. The shepherd leads the way. So he can't be expecting the congregation to do things that he himself is unwilling to do.
This is just something I've been going through in my own kind of personal devotions and seeking the Lord's face. But as much as you've experienced, when we read stories about so many times in the Bible where the Lord says, go do this, and they go and do it, but their role in it is so small. Like, I think of the lesson that I taught at church on Wednesday was about Jericho, and they just marched around the city. I mean, how much work did they actually do to bring victory? The first victory, once they've crossed over Jordan, it becomes like paradigm for them. But how much did they actually do? Really, in the end, we would just argue they obeyed. Yes. So when it comes to ministry, in your understanding of this relationship between God's working in you, in your church, how he grows the church, how the people themselves grow as Christians, where do you put your role, what you have to do and what you expect or what God does? And I feel like there's kind of like some of you and all of him, but like, what's your sense of that?
Well, definitely God works through us. John the Baptist, they came to him thinking he was the Christ or something else. And he said, I'm a voice crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord. We're just a voice, and God speaks through us. Now, we could end up on the heights with that, or we could end up in the depths with that too. We just have to have a better understanding for who we are and let God use us. The word ministry, of course, means servant, service, and that's what we're here for. We're here to serve.
So then do you apply metrics in your church?
I count everybody. Everybody counts with Pastor Fisher.
Okay.
If we have kids in the nursery, I count them. Yeah, if the guy comes in and there's only 5 minutes of the service left, I count them too. Yeah, everybody counts.
Now, how about I've been preaching here for 5 years, and we've only grown by 12%, and I think those are bad numbers, like that kind of metrics.
Oh, yes. Well, I'd love 12%. It would be awesome. I went to a seminar not too long ago, and so he said, if you have 100 people in your church, which, by the way, I don't, but if you had 100 people in your church, and you're going to lose 10% every year just through attrition, people moving away, whatever, dying. And so you need, if you're going to have a net growth, you need to have as many guests, that is visitors, a year as you have members. So if you have 100 regular attenders, you need to have 100 guests per year. And then you have to keep 15% of them if you're going to have a net growth. Because if you lose 10 and you gain 15, the next year you should be 105. So that's pretty minimum. If you don't get that, your church is in a hard way. And my church, the church I'm at now, has been in decline for many, many years. And we're down to, we have a very large aging building, and we just have a small group of people that meet there. And that's a challenge. And that's another challenge of current ministry is, what are we going to do with our buildings? You know, the church is, in America is saddled with old buildings that are very precious to us and that are a great resource for ministry, but they consume a huge amount of resources just to maintain them. And that is a huge problem. And some are turning away from buildings, but in the past, the building has been a base for ministry as well. So the buildings are a real challenge right now.
Yeah, and on that front, kind of like old school ideas, what would you say about needing to get education to be a pastor? Would you recommend that guys coming out of high school go to college? Would you recommend they go to seminary? Or would you recommend they just be students of the Word and give themselves to the Lord?
Well, I think I see an increasingly distressing movement toward having clergy who do not have formal training. I think the formal training needs to take a different picture. We cannot be graduating pastors who are saddled with $100,000 in school loans and then can't afford to go into the ministry. We can't have that anymore. We need to change the way we do ministry preparation. On the other hand, I see some people going into the ministry who don't have any formal training, and I just think it doesn't serve the church well. I think you're better off with people who have had some professional training, and but the seminary system definitely needs to be changed. It's too onerous now. 7 years is a long time to go through. Back in the days of D.L. Moody, they faced a very similar situation. He came up with the 3-year Bible school program. And that was to find men who could fill in the gap. And something like that needs to be started today, so that education for clergy can be much more affordable and attainable.
Yeah.
Very good.
When Marlene passed away, my wife, I thought about going back to school and getting some more training. One seminary I contacted, they had a worksheet online, said that if you're going to come here to seminary, you should have a personal budget of $50,000 a year. I've never really seen $50,000 a year. That just seemed like an awful lot of money to do that. And then, of course, to be in seminary training for 3 or 4 years, that's $200,000, and that's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And somebody just entering the ministry is not going to be expecting to make that much money. So it's a challenge.
Yeah.
So what's up? I know we're getting close to the end of your available time. What are some just advice that you would give to pastors, younger, older, middle, it doesn't matter, just advice that you would give that as you see the need of our country, you see the need of within our culture, advice that you would give to pastors in this day?
You hear a lot of pastors say, it's kind of a joke, well, it's the things that they didn't tell you about in Bible school or seminary that always trip you up. If they were in seminaries and Bible colleges were to tell you everything, you'd never get out of school, because every day changes. And even after close to 40 years in the ministry, there are new challenges that come every day. Really, a person really needs to be flexible. You need to be flexible. And of course, don't neglect your own personal spiritual life. Don't neglect your family. These things have always been true and need to be emphasized again and again, over and over again. Your ministry is delivered as a personal thing, and so your person has to be up to that. And it's not just an intellectual thing. It's not just talking about things that you learned about in systematic theology. It has to do with talking to people personally. So get to know people. That's some good advice I got back in the 70s, and I think it's still good advice today. Get to know people and be able to minister to people in many different contexts.
If you had a book, 2, 3 that you recommend that we read as far as what it means to be a good pastor, or something that maybe puts you on the right track, but something that we could look to after this is over that could kind of continue to carry us on in our understanding what it would mean to be a good pastor.
I've been blessed over the years by reading biographies. Right now I'm working on the Pulitzer Prize winning biography about the most famous man in America. I don't know if you've heard of that book or not. It's the life of Henry Ward Beecher. And in his day, he was a very well-known pastor, very well-known public speaker, and had the very large Plymouth Church of the Pilgrims in Brooklyn, New York, a very significant ministry. I mean, so many people came to hear him preach, they had to give tickets and then make sure everybody left for one service before the next service came, because they packed out the auditorium week after week. Of course, he ministered back in the 1800s, but his experiences were amazingly fresh to me as I've read through that. So I read biographies. Read about the church fathers. Read about the difficulties that they went through. They ministered to people too, and it wasn't. Church history is not just about battles and dates. They're real people. And so yeah, I enjoy reading reading biographies of great Christians in the past, seeing how they struggled and imitating the life of the saints. Really.
Very cool.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what I had. I mean, that's the totality. Unless Pastor, you've got something that we hadn't covered, or something you think that we should have asked that you'd like to put on here in the last 5 minutes we've got.
Well, I didn't exactly know where you wanted to go with this, so I do find that after all these years, you'll never outgrow your need for personal prayer and personally reading the Word. As someone, I think any minister runs the risk of treating the Bible somewhat professionally. That because I have to write sermons based on it. It becomes a source book for me, rather than the Word that God is speaking to me. And I don't mean that in some necessarily a mystical way, but the more I read it, every time I read it, I get something more out of it. And I read to find something there for my soul. And I think that's important.
That's great. Well, anything else, Pete, before we let Pastor go?
No, it's not. We really put him on the spot. This is the first time we all ran through it. So
yeah.
I think it went relatively well.
Right. Yeah. This is, we didn't even get into, the doctrinal errors that we were talking about. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for spending your morning with us and carving out a small time for your busy day. And it's an honor. And thank you.
All right. Well, you're most welcome. And it's a privilege for me to be here as well. Thank you.
Well, I want to stop recording in 3, 2, and 1.